For today's episode of our Best of 2024 special, it's time for my favorite horror games. This was a very wide and very interesting year for horror, and we got some games that kind of run the spectrum from creepy to scary and anything in between. One game that we unfortunately didn't get a chance to play in horror for 2024 was Hollow Body. This was the kind of future cyberpunk meets Silent Hill game we tried the demo to. At some point, though, I do want to give it a try, but it seems to be getting some pretty good results from people who did play it, so kind of a half recommendation to start our video off with. But for my first actual entry for Best of 2024, we go to Crow County. This is the homage to basically the PS1 era of horror, complete with somewhat fixed camera angles, trying to find lots and lots of healing items, and of course, solving a myriad of puzzles. The game features multiple kind of bonus things to go after, of course, rewards for being in the game with all kinds of crazier weapons, and a very interesting story that you might not figure out where it's going until the very end. This one doesn't quite do anything I would say is outside the box, but if you are a modern retro fan or you have fond memories of the PlayStation 1 kind of blocky polygon style, then this one is definitely worth a play. It seems like we're in the modern retro period for horror for this year, as our next two entries all feature again. Now we're going to kind of the PlayStation 2 era of modern retro horror. First off is Mouthwashing, a game that could probably fit more in the narrative side, but in order to keep things from getting too weird in terms of their genre placements, I'm going to put into horror. The game that tells a very interesting, very stylish, and also very mature story about a crew stranded out in space, and things tend to break down, both physically and mentally, among the crew on the ship very fast. And saying any more would be a tremendous spoiler for the game. What this game does really well is add a touch of flair to the survival horror aspects. You have this kind of like vaporware scene transitions happening. The game will jump between multiple time periods to kind of give the player the whole story, but in different pieces and chunks. And the game does a really good job of setting up some very interesting and original set pieces. It can be a little bit frustrating in spots. While the title is mostly going to be linear and more story driven, there are a few kind of, I would say, action segments here and there that can be a little bit tricky if you're not ready for them. But this game definitely gets on in terms of adding style to survival horror, just to the horror in general. And definitely looking forward to see what the developer will do next, now that they're a little bit more well known after the success of Mouthwashing. So if you are a fan of horror and looking for a game that's going to really go to some unusual places, and again, is definitely not for kids in the audience, then it is a very easy recommendation, one that won't take up too much of your time to get to the kind of disturbing stuff. Our next entry also goes for style and horror, but in a very different way, with Sorry We're Closed. A kind of mix of almost like a Killer 7 with the horrors of dating and romancing in the modern era. You have been kind of coerced and taken over by a demon who is obsessed with finding love, and they are going to curse and ruin your eternal life unless you figure out how to get out of it. So you and your friend slash maybe love interest slash important person in your life is going to aid you in figuring out what this curse is and hopefully figuring out how to get out of it. The game features multiple endings, and this one goes for I wouldn't quite put it fully in the horror category. It's more kind of like, I guess, like thematic side of horror, as you'll be armed with your gun and various other weapons that will be used to fight all manner of strange creatures. The aesthetics and art design in this one are really well done. While I wouldn't say it has the same level of flair as Mouthwashing, it does have its own unique sense of style to how everything works, and this very unusual world that you find yourself in. Again, the multiple endings and routes does give this one a bit more replayability compared to some of the other horror games that we've seen and played. And this one, again, leans more towards kind of, romance, more like visual novel in that respect. So if you are someone looking for a little love and a little bit of scares to go with it all, then you should give this one a play. Our next game kind of gets in the half recommendation. You'll understand why in a second, and that is Tormenture. This is one that I played on my own, and it basically combines the old Atari adventure game with that of horror, as your cartridge is cursed, and if you don't beat the game, it will kill you, pull you into the game, or something along those lines. So you must use all the tools and tactics of the 1980s available to you in order to solve this game. It does a great job of kind of building the world and lore throughout this title, and again, the art and styles of like an 8-bit or even I think this less bit of an Atari system come through really well. The reason why it gets kind of a half recommendation for me is that I ran into some very nasty bugs that made it kind of impossible to get going until they fix them, and I don't know they have since I checked this one out. But the intriguing and original premise does help carry Tormenture quite a bit. So if you are a fan of the 80s and looking for some old res horror, then give this one a try, and hopefully you won't run into the same bugs that I did during my play. And for our last pick for horror this year, it is the game Indika, a title that kind of plays more like almost like an indie movie in terms of its unique cuts, story, and kind of what is happening in this space. It is a game that will do everything from break the rules of physics to even breaking the rules of interaction within the game in order to tell its original story. I love the style of this one, and this is definitely more style over substance compared to some of our other titles, as you are perhaps possessed by the devil, or maybe you're just suffering a mental illness. We don't know, but we are exploring this strange land, getting into all manner of situations, and some very weird things happening along the way. Like Mouthwashing and Sorry We're Closed, these are games, or Indika is a game that it definitely puts its style up front. And while the gameplay can be a little bit off or weird in a few spots, it definitely carries it through all the way to the end. For a game that kind of is a very gut punch of an ending, and it's one of those titles where I feel like this is a good start to build something greater upon. I believe this is the first game from the studio, and if that is the case, it is a very big punch up for them. And I'm very interested to see if they'll continue the story, a similar story in the same universe, or do something completely different for their next game. But this one is a very unusual and original title, more in terms of its storytelling, its conventions, rather than from a mechanic standpoint. So if you're looking for a very haunting and original tale, one that you're not going to quite know where it's going to go from beginning to end, then give this one a play for sure. And with that, we are done with horror. And we still got plenty more games to get through. So as always, what are some of your favorite horror games from 2024? Whether they mildly spooked you, moderately scared you, or you're still hiding under your blankets right now as you're typing this. Let me know in the comments down below, and I will see everyone for our next part. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more in my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.